Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
In order to get a good grade, that devalues the learning itself. It's now just a tedious prerequisite for getting the high mark, which is why the schools that care not only about academic excellence, but care about kids wanting to be lifelong learners and remaining curious, never would reduce anything the kids did to a letter or number.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
This time last year, we had some fantastic conversations with a guy called Alfie Kohn. Alfie is the author of a number of books, including Punished by Rewards, The Homework Myth, Unconditional Parenting, The Schools Our Children Deserve, I could go on. He's written Beyond Discipline, No Contest, What Does It Mean to Be Well Educated, Feel Bad Education, and so much more. And today we're going to talk to Alfie about some of those educational concepts, specifically report cards, because it's that time of year.
It's that time of the year when parents and children are looking at report cards, and a lot of students and parents are invested in what those report cards say. Alfie, you've got a really strong education background and you've researched this for decades. What's your position on it and why?
Well, the research finds that if you take a large number of students and give them all the same assignment to do, and then you randomly assign them either to a graded or non-graded condition, there are three robust differences. Students who are led to focus on their grades or marks first become less interested in whatever the topic is they were working on. To the best of my knowledge, every study that has ever looked at intrinsic motivation to learn and how it's affected by grades has found that grades have an adverse impact. Second, students who are trying to focus on their grades will pick the easiest possible task if they're given a choice. Not because they're lazy, or lack a growth mindset, but because they're rational. If the point is to bring up your grades, then obviously you're going to pick the shortest book or the most familiar topic to do your project on, because that maximizes the chance of getting a good grade. So when schools use grades and parents emphasize the importance, that's a way to convince kids to avoid intellectual risk-taking. And the third effect, according to the research, is that the more focused you are on grades as a student, the more shallow your thinking tends to become. Now you're not interested in asking questions like, how do we know this is true? Or doesn't that contradict what we were reading last week? You're just going to ask, do we have to know this for the test?
Alfie, listening to those three reasons, I love the way that you've gone straight into the research, and this is consistent with so much of the work that I've been doing for the last number of years as well. I'd love to hear the way, because you really do have an extraordinary gift for the way that you explain and reduce the research into concepts that people can just grab hold of so quickly. The first point that you raised, I just want to zero in on that for a moment. You said that when we emphasize grades, when we ask children to complete an assignment so that they can be evaluated and assessed, that they actually become less interested in the task. Now, any parent, any school teacher would just shudder to think that the very thing that matters to their children for their capacity, for their learning, by virtue of it being assessed, is going to reduce their interest in doing it. But hang on, this is important. You have to learn this. So how do you explain this reduction in intrinsic motivation?
First, let's back up and make sure everyone understands the important difference between intrinsic motivation, which means you do something because you find it meaningful or it gives you pleasure, and extrinsic motivation, which means you do something in order to bring about a result outside of or extrinsic to the task, like getting some reward. In this case, it's a grade, but in other cases, we could be talking about money or food, or praise, good job. Those are all extrinsic inducements. So I don't give a crap how motivated our kids are. What matters is how our kids are motivated. That is, does it tend to be more intrinsic or extrinsic? Every time we give kids a gold star, or a good job, or a grade or any other kind of reward, a doggy biscuit for doing something, we have reduced their interest in whatever they had to do to get that reward. So, for example, other research has found that children whose parents praise them or otherwise reward them tend to be less generous and caring than their peers. And the effect is most pronounced if they were rewarded or praised for being generous. Because what we've taught them is helping somebody is just a means to an end. In this case, if I help them and I'm caught being good, that means that I'll get congratulated or some kind of reward given to me, which devalues helping. So exactly the same thing is true in school, where if you're learning in order to get a good grade, that devalues the learning itself. It's now just a tedious prerequisite for getting the high mark, which is why the schools that care not only about academic excellence, but care about kids wanting to be lifelong learners and remaining curious, never would reduce anything the kids did to a letter or number.
It's interesting. In Australia, there has been a general movement away from a lot of parents haven't caught on to this yet, but in the schools, they understand this. There's been a really strong movement away from this extraordinary emphasis on you've got to get the grade to get into the course. There are now so many alternative pathways to get into different degrees. And of course, once you're in, nobody actually asks you what your grade is. Once you've graduated, no one says, hey, what grades did you get? It's just a means to end, but we've got these wonderful alternative pathways now. After the break, we are going to talk to Alfie about some of those solutions so that we can create the right environment at home in spite of the grade emphasis that happens. And we're also going to talk about grades for effort.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Are screens creating tension at home? Tweens, Teens and Screens is a webinar to guide families to healthy, safe super screen solutions. Buy it today at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we have one of our favourite guests back with us, Alfie Kohn, and we're talking about report cards and grades. Do they really matter?
So we had Alfie on the podcast a few times last year talking about so many great things. Definitely worth searching it up. In fact, we'll link to those podcast episodes because they were so good. Alfie is the author of probably a dozen books, everything from Punished by Rewards to Unconditional Parenting. He's written No Contest, Feel Bad Education, The Myth of the Spoiled Child, The Homework Myth, and a whole lot more. And we're talking grades today because report card time has arrived and the emails are landing, the report cards are arriving in the letterbox. Alfie, a few years ago, one of our kids came home with a report card. In one of the schools that our children have attended over the years, there was a report card that included grades for effort. So you didn't just get a grade for how you actually performed. The teacher gave you a grade for how hard you tried. And at the time, I was thinking, well, at least they're acknowledging that not every kid's going to do super well and get straight A's, but at least if they have a go, they can get acknowledged that way. But as it happened, our daughter, who was trying her hardest, burst into tears when she saw her report card and then sobbed into my shoulder, Dad, I even failed trying.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your response when you hear a story like that?
Oh, it's, I mean, even without the particular proof of the damaging effect anecdotally from your daughter, I mean, I've been going around saying effort grades are a way you can now fail even at trying. You get a high, achievement grade and a low effort grade. What does that tell you? Or the reverse, a high effort grade and a low achievement grade means, thanks for making the effort, even though you're too stupid for it to do any good. I mean, There's no way this turns out to be constructive. Effort grades, look, you're not going to fix something as inherently destructive as grades by adding a different grade. What it does is it centers the problem in the kid, so that the adults no longer have to rethink the structure or the system, the curriculum or the pedagogy. They can say when a kid isn't making an effort, well, that kid is failing at trying. So we'll grade it with effort. That way, you never have to ask, why are the kids not interested in this? Could it have something to do with the task or the way we're teaching, or the fact that kids have no input, no decision-making authority about what it is they're doing? So cui bono is the Latin question I like to ask. Who benefits when you give kids effort grades? And the question answers itself. It's the adults who no longer have to reflect on their own practice, but just try harder to evaluate and manipulate the children.
Wow.
Yeah.
That hits hard. Alfie, we've talked about the problems with grades and report cards. I'm wondering if we can give some solutions. Report cards are going to end up in people's inboxes or their letterboxes over the next few weeks. What approach would you suggest parents take when that report card arrives? In our home, Justin, pretty much he doesn't even look at them. I kind of feel like it's a little bit dismissive. So I spend a bit of time with the kids and we kind of read over it because they want to share their achievements.
Well, I still talk to the kids about their school experience, but I ask what they're finding delight in, what they're enjoying, what they're learning, what the processes are to help them to develop themselves, rather than saying, what did you get on your report? Whereas you do walk through the report card a little bit. But anyway, back to Kylie's question, Alfie. How do you think parents might navigate this time of year?
As invisible as possible for as long as possible. If you can get away with ignoring the report card completely, good, do it. If that seems weird to the kid, or you can't bear it, then take the other approach you've just suggested, which is, talk about it briefly, ask them questions, and move on. Never become more excited about your kid with more approval and attention and love and affection when the kid has gotten good grades, or withdraw all of that, and be all concerned when they don't. When parents actually reward kids for good report cards or punish them for bad report cards, they're squaring the damage. That's a reward for a reward.
So, Alfie, in light of the fact that we live in the world that we live in right now, and this is not going to change overnight, how do we create an environment at home and for teachers who are listening in the classroom that fosters a desire to learn and a reduced interest in grades and scores?
Well, again, every time I answer a version of this question, I have to push back on the premise of this is the world we live in, etc. Realism is profoundly conservative when it's framed that way as a way of discouraging us from questioning the premise, which is why do we have that system and how do we go about changing it? But in the meantime, there's a couple of things we can do. First is we minimize the harm of anything like grades in all the ways that I've been talking about here, both at home and at school. Stop doing the bad stuff, or at least dial it back as much as you can possibly get away with. And then think about the good stuff. And that looks different depending on whether you have little kids or big kids, whether you're a parent or a teacher or an administrator. But it opens up a whole different conversation, a whole new book about what promotes and sustains delight. How do we avoid killing the curiosity that kids start out with? And in part, it's about making sure that schooling is not just about cramming forgettable facts into short-term memory. It's about asking deep, meaningful questions and creating projects and problems to try to have some answer there, not just practicing skills in isolation, not assessing with tests or quizzes ever, because authentic assessment, and there's a whole library on that topic, can allow teachers to get a sense of what kids understand and where they need help without ever giving a test, because tests measure what matters least. And they can have more emphasis on collaboration in the classroom, where kids are learning with and from one another most of the time in pairs and small groups. And finally, and here I'm trying to obviously quickly summarize a great deal of stuff in a few words, is the way we can sustain kids' excitement about learning is by giving them more say about what they're learning and how and when and with whom and why. The classrooms where it's easiest to see that the kid's intrinsic motivation is there are not just those without rewards and punishments, grades, tests, and so on. It's those where the kids, not only individually, but as a community of learners, are democratically making decision about the topics they're going to address and how they're going to address them. Because as I never tire of pointing out, kids learn how to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions.
I feel like we could just completely reinvent the school system based on this conversation, and there's a whole lot of work to do. Alfie Kohn, thank you so much. What an absolute delight to be able to spend some time with you again and learn from you and absorb your ideas, your thoughts, your wisdom around reports for this time of year where everyone's starting to get nervous about what's going to happen. Hopefully this has changed people's attitudes substantially. Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to talk to you again.
AlfieKohn.org is where you'll find everything you need to know about Alfie Kohn, including his books. You'll find them wherever you normally would buy your books. You can also find them at his website. That's AlfieKohn.org.
That's Kohn, Kohn.
Yeah, AlfieKohn.org. We really hope that this podcast has given you something to think about. Really, really insightful, really provocative. And I have to say, I'm pretty happy with the way we're doing stuff.
It's interesting, as we've taken a really huge step back on report cards, they really don't play a huge part in our day-to-day life. The kids' grades have actually
gone up
through the roof.
It's so
I've
surprising.
been blown away, and they've come home so elated, and we don't push them to do their homework.
No. And you know what we do when they come home with a good grade? We say, how does that feel? And what did you do to get that grade? And what do you feel when you're in that class? How are you enjoying the class? That's the crux of it, isn't it? How much are you enjoying it? Because that's getting into that intrinsic motivation. And then what did you do to get that grade? Well, and how does it feel to get a grade like that? It's just it's such a low pressure response.
Well, and we're just seeing their intrinsic motivation to learn increase as we take all the pressure off them, from our end at least, to just enjoy their learning process.
And two, I know our time is up, but two really quick examples. When our second daughter was finishing high school, doing her Year 12 exams, from the start of Year 12, we said, there's no pressure from us. Do whatever you need to do, and we will support you and encourage you, so long as you know what the expectation is once you finish high school, that you're either earning full-time or learning full-time. Just enjoy Year 12 and spend time with your friends and do whatever you feel you need to educationally. And she ended up getting a phenomenal score, even though not once, not a single time throughout all of Year 12 did we say, hey, you need to do some study. No, not once. And the same with our daughter who's now going into Year 12. She's pretty much just picked up a whole lot of, not quite, but almost straight A's in her report card. And we're not interested in it, but we're delighted for her because she's loving the experience and she's actually enjoying her learning. We've told her she was worried about subjects that are going to get scaled down. And we said, forget about it. Don't worry. Pick subjects you're going to like. And she's having a ball, isn't she?
It's interesting. Before we'd had that conversation with her, though, the anxiety that she was feeling because she was working with subjects that she thought
she had to do.
And the pressure that she was putting on herself to perform because she'd picked those high-ranking subjects. And as soon as she let go of them and picked the things that she liked, we've literally seen a different child.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rule. I'm from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about Alfie Kohn, visit AlfieKohn with a K, Kohn.org. And for all of our stuff, happyfamilies.com.au.